The war in Ukraine went far from Russia's plan. Obviously, it was not in Russia's interest to get involved in a protracted war that has become a positional war. Today, the situation on the front line has effectively frozen. However, the war is not over and the fighting continues. In this issue, we will discuss what happens if Russia loses this war. What scenarios can we expect? To begin with, it is worth noting what we mean by Russia losing. Since Russia is a nuclear power, a loss in the classical sense, with an invasion of the capital and occupation of land, is unlikely to be possible. If any country invades Russian territory, Russia's nuclear doctrine could be triggered, and under such a threat, the use of nuclear weapons could be put on the agenda and would in principle be legitimate. It is unlikely that any country in the world would want to do this, including Ukraine. In the current format of the confrontation, Ukraine's victory and Russia's loss can be seen as a return to the borders of 1991. In this case, the war could be considered a complete failure for Russia, as the actual territorial losses would affect not only the lands conquered since 2022, but also the land seized in 14. Crimea itself can play an important symbolic role, and its deoccupation is a defeat for the Putin regime, which has built a cult around the peninsula. This has been decided. So what can happen if Russia loses the war, Ukraine regains its territorial integrity? Let's consider a number of scenarios. However, we will not estimate their probability because it is impossible to do so. The first option is that nothing will happen. To be more precise, nothing will change significantly. Even if Ukraine regains all of its territories, the Putin regime can remain on its feet and continue to exist, and Russia will not be significantly affected. Over the past few years, Putin's regime has gone through many crises and virtually all the tests of strength, from the war itself and sanctions to Prigozhin's attempted military coup. Unlike many, Putin's regime has proven to be incredibly robust and can remain so even if it loses control of Ukrainian lands. Putin's repressive machine will be able to suppress all dissenters, from liberals to monarchist conservatives. This has already happened. Both Navalny and Strelkov are in prison at the same time, and the regime is structured in such a way that virtually anyone can fall under the repression if the authorities want to. The reaction of Russians will also not play a significant role. The most active are being repressed, and the opinion of others will not be of interest. Moreover, most Russians will not react sharply after Russia gives Ukraine its territories. Russia lost Kherson, and there was a lot of talk about how Russia is there forever. Did this bother the Russian population much? The situation with Crimea may be more complicated, but this issue can be resolved through propaganda. Propaganda has a special place in the Russian hierarchy. Sometimes it seems that it can explain any failure of the Kremlin and make it look more favorable. In this case, it can also play a crucial role. For example, it can be announced on TV that this was the goal of the so-called special operation and that all the goals have been achieved, to eliminate the American-centered world and so on. The second option is more interesting: popular uprisings or a coup, perhaps even a combination of these events, as for example happened in Portugal. Russia's loss of Ukrainian territory could cause discontent among both the general population and the establishment. This will largely depend on how all these processes take place. If Russia gradually loses control over Ukrainian territories, it is likely that such a process stretched over time will be perceived more loyally. And if the entire front collapses with the flight of the Russian army, the failure will be obvious, and even propaganda will not be able to save it. Despite the absence of civil society in Russia and the de facto total control of the streets, such processes can occur suddenly, and the collapse of the regime can begin with lightning speed. All of this could happen in conjunction with an elite coup, when it is decided that Putin can no longer perform the functions of the president. Something similar happened to Mussolini in 1943, when the Allies had already launched an offensive against Italy. A coup took place in the country, Mussolini was removed from power, and the new government concluded a separate peace with the Allies. Mussolini's fascist regime, which had seemed incredibly stable, collapsed overnight, and Mussolini himself was able to avoid justice only thanks to Hitler, and even later led the puppet Italian Social Republic in the north of the Apennine Peninsula. Putin's ouster itself can take place according to various scenarios, starting with a soft, internal elite coup. Putin voluntarily resigns, and an alternative candidate takes his place, in which authoritarianism may be preserved to some extent to the most severe. Putin's violent overthrow and even possible assassination, like what happened to Ceausescu, who was shot by his own people. The third option is a civil war and the possibility of Russia's disintegration. This option partly stems from the previous one. Losing the war could lead to a complete collapse of existing institutions and result in civil strife between the various parties. Russia already faced a similar situation during the First World War when the empire collapsed. The revolution itself was not associated with any major losses at the front, but rather with a protracted war and the plight of the citizens. The current economic system allows us to avoid such critical moments, but the level of discontent could lead to a sharp collapse and revolutionary sentiment throughout the country. Moreover, it is worth noting that such processes can begin regardless of the situation at the front and even before Russia loses, especially if a long war has a severe impact on the lives of citizens. At present, however, this is not the case. With the sharp weakening of the central government, separatist movements may reappear in a number of Russian regions that have been suppressed all along. The most obvious one is the Caucasus region, Chechnya, as well as Dagestan, Ingushetia, Kalmykia, and other republics. The level of national consciousness in these regions is quite high, so the likelihood of separatism is also high. Other regions, such as Tatarstan, Tuva, or Buryatia, may also become separatist, and the growth of national movements there may occur overnight. Similar processes began to take place in the USSR before its collapse. As soon as the central government gave in and granted a small part of the rights of citizens, protests and the growth of national movements began throughout the Union, which ultimately led to the collapse of the Union. Drawing on the experience of the USSR, we can say that the separation of regions in this case can take place according to a soft or hard scenario. Either the government will become so weak that it will simply lose control over the regions, or it will simply let them go on their own, or it will all result in new wars and bloodshed, as it did in Chechnya in the 1990s. As for the impact on the world, a peaceful transition of power or the preservation of Putin's regime is unlikely to change anything significantly on the world stage. With a change of government, even if authoritarianism remains, it is possible to restore normal relations with Western countries and establish economic contacts. If we consider the option of a difficult transit, with revolutions or civil wars, this could have a significant impact on neighboring countries and beyond. It will generally start a rebalancing of power in the entire post-Soviet space, where Russia still plays a major role. For example, this could lead to a change of power in Belarus and the fall of the Lukashenko regime. The global economy could also feel the blow in the event of major instability. Russia is a major supplier of resources on the world stage, and if it is unable to supply them in full, the world will face a significant deficit in some sectors of the economy that cannot be closed in a year or two. First of all, this concerns energy resources, but other goods are no less important, such as metals or fertilizers. To summarize, Russia's defeat in Ukraine could lead to completely different scenarios for Putin and Russia itself, ranging from nothing changing significantly and the regime maintaining its stability to significant internal instability and revolution. Thank you for watching. Please like and subscribe to the channel to not miss new videos.
I never answer to no, man, I still go.